Today I'm going to show you how to repair an old torn up photo in Photoshop. Hey guys, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace, and you can find me on Phlearn.com, where we make learning Photoshop and photography fun. And today's episode is brought to you by my good friend and photographer Ed Frazier. And he sent me this image. It's actually of his father, taken back in the days of film. And so it's a scan of a physical image. The problem is the image over time, it's gotten torn up. There are a lot of blemishes. There's some discoloration. And today we're going to bring all that together and show you how to fix an old torn up photo. We're going to show you how to take different pieces of a torn up photo and bring those back together in Photoshop as well. Then we're going to show you guys how to actually fix the blemishes in the photo. We're going to show you guys how to use the spot healing brush, the clone stamp tool, as well as the brush tool to get rid of all those blemishes. We're going to show you how to use some selective color to take care of some discoloration issues in the photo. And by the end of today's episode, we're going to take this pieced together photo and bring it back to its original life. All right, so here's our photo that we're working with today. And as you can see, the image has seen better days. So to start with, basically what I need to do is I need to figure out how to get each one of these pieces. Right now, they're all on the same layer. I need to get them all on different layers so I can actually start moving them around and placing them back together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection out of my background. So we're going to grab our magic wand tool. You hit W for the magic wand tool. And then I'm just going to click right here on my background because it's completely white. And that's going to really allow me to make a nice selection out of the background, which I'm going to then in turn use to cut everything out. Now let's see, based on the tolerance right up here, it's going to choose how much or how little we're actually going to select of the image. And this looks pretty good. It's not a perfect selection right around the image, but we've got so much repair work that needs to be done. We're looking pretty good to start with. Now the next thing we're going to do, let's zoom in. I'm going to hit Refine Edge right up here because we're going to go ahead and bring this edge in just a little bit. So let's hit Refine Edge. There we can see a really nice example of what we're actually working with in our image. So we're going to bring up feathering just a little bit. There we go. And I'm actually going to shift the edge. We're going to shift it in towards the center of the image a little bit more. There we go. That's going to look good. And it's going to take care of some of the shadows and other areas around the image and just allow us to cut everything out and place them back together a little bit better. All right. So let's hit OK. And there we have it. We have 3 selections. Now, well, basically one selection for our 3 images. So what we're going to do is I'm actually going to inverse this selection. So I'm going to go to select and then down to inverse. And now what you can see is instead of selecting the white, it's actually got the different colors or the different pieces selected. So here in my background layer, we're going to hit Control or Command J. And that's going to duplicate those pieces onto a new layer. So Control or Command J, and there we have a new layer, and we should have a clear blank background, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now let's go ahead and start working with these pieces because I need each of these to be on their own layer as well. So what we're going to do is grab my lasso tool and make a selection right around each one of the pieces. There we go. We got a selection around that one. Now I'm on this layer where the actual piece is. We're going to hit Command or Control X, which is cut, and then we're going to hit Shift Command V, which is place or paste right back into place, but it's going to be on a new layer. So we're basically just doing a cut and paste here. So now, instead of this being on this layer, it's on its own layer. We're going to do this again so you can see. All right, so let's take this bottom piece here. We're going to make a selection right around it. There we go. Super simple with my lasso tool. Okay, on this same layer that you just want to make sure, turn it off and on to make sure it's on that layer. We're going to hit Command X to cut it out, and then Shift Command V is going to place it right back onto a new layer. Okay, cool. So we're looking pretty good. Now let's go ahead and start moving these things in place and actually start lining some things up. So we'll take our layer 3 here, okay, and use my move tool. So I'm going to hit V for the move tool, and then I can just start moving this around. Now, I'm not so much paying attention to the tear. What I want to pay attention to are the areas in my photo where I can actually see things line up. Like anything that's geometry, where I can kind of see, like, you know, obviously, like this is a big machine, right? So this line should continue on to that line. So as I move these things up, I can kind of use what's actually in the photo to define where the actual images should go. So you can also, if you need to move them, if you need to move the images, you can use the up, down, left, and right keys on your keyboard. There we go. So I'm kind of looking at this, as like a continuation of that line there, and then a continuation of this line as well. And if I get that right, everything else should continue, including our subject's face and everything like that. So you can see we have a lot of area that's just kind of like just a big giant tear. So we're going to have to do a lot of work to repair that tear and make it look right. But so far we're looking pretty good with getting everything in place. Okay, now this layer should be relatively easy as well. Just take this corner here and let's see, we'll go ahead and place it. Let's just zoom in. There we go. And I'm going to align the border there on the top and the border on the right. In this case, I'm going to just, we're going to rotate this a little bit. So I'm going to hit Command T and we're just going to rotate this around just a little bit. There we go. And then I'm going to use my arrows on my keyboard to just kind of nudge that in place. All right. There we go. And that looks pretty good. So you can see, because we have a tear, right, some of these areas overlap. So like this, we can see there's white area here, right at the end of this image. But this is actually the underside of the image. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually move this layer down. So let's click and drag this down. And there we go. Now we can see we actually have some of the information from the layer above it. And let's see, that looks pretty good too. So there's a lot of area. I mean, when a photo is torn up and stuff like this, there's a lot of areas that are just completely missing. And we've got, what looks like, maybe some dirt and stuff like that on the image, as well as basically like a piece of Scotch tape that someone had used. This was pre-Photoshop. This is Photoshop version 1.0 Scotch tape, basically to paste everything together. All right, now let's go ahead. You know what? Under these layers, I'm going to create a solid color adjustment layer, and we're just going to go straight to white. So I can just put something under them so I can actually see what I'm doing. All right, so what we've got here, let's go ahead and group these two layers together. We're just going to call this background. All right, and now we have three individual layers. So we've got our layer on our left, we've got our top layer, and our right layer. And everything is lined up really nicely. So the first part of the image is done. Now let's move into actually repairing all these tears and blemishes and color discolorations on this image. In this section, we're going to show you guys how to use the spot healing brush tool, the clone stamp tool, as well as the brush tool to actually bring these images back together. So let's start with our spot healing brush tool. Now the spot healing brush tool, we're going to create a new layer for this. So let's just create a new layer, and we're going to go right over here to where we see our spot healing brush tool. Now this is an awesome tool. Anytime you have a blemish that's basically something like this, a blemish that doesn't have a whole lot right around it. In the spot healing brush tool, we want to make sure we have content aware right there, and we want to make sure we have sample all layers as well, and we are on a new layer. So anytime I have a little blemish like that, I can basically just use this tool, paint right over it, and it's going to completely disappear. It samples another area of my photo and replaces it with that area. So anything that we have that's like a little blemish like that, we can just completely repair with the spot healing brush tool. Now, a lot of this work is not spot healing brush tool worthy because it's just too complex. You'll see if I do try to cover this area here, it may do an okay job, but we're going to have to keep painting and painting and painting. So this is actually not doing too bad of a job. These little blemishes and scratches and stuff like that, spot healing brush tool, it's so quick and easy that I would really recommend starting out with this tool because you can do quite a bit of your image with just this one tool. There's no sampling involved. You just literally paint right over what you want. Now, moving to our subject, if we were to try to use this, it's not really going to work that well because we have basically not a whole lot of detail to pull from here, and there's a lot of intricate detail that's needed in my image. Like something like that, it's not going to do the best job. So let's move on to our next tool, which is our clone stamp tool. Gives you a little bit more control. So we're going to create a new layer, and now let's hit S for the clone stamp tool. Now the reason I like the clone stamp tool is because you can sample exactly where you want. The spot healing brush tool is going to sample an area on its own, and then it's going to try to blend things together. The clone stamp tool is just going to give you an exact duplicate of wherever you sample. So you're going to get a lot more control with the clone stamp tool. So let's try this here. I'm going to hit S for the clone stamp tool, and then we're going to just sample this area right over here. So sample right up there, and then we're going to paint in right down below. And I can very accurately just get rid of this line if I want to. And you can zoom in really close and take care of all the small details and blemishes that you want. So anywhere that requires quite a bit of detail work, that's where I'm going to be relying on my clone stamp tool. Now I'm going to use the same thing. We're going to just cover right over this tear. So I'm going to sample this area, and we're going to cover right over that tear. There we go, including all this blemish work using our clone stamp tool. Now, when you do use the clone stamp tool, you are going to get some areas that duplicate. Like, if you have a little spot or something like that, it's probably going to duplicate over and over again. So just be sure to look out for those duplicate areas. I'll show you what I mean. Like if we have like that little area right there, if I clone stamp that, we're going to get, now 3 of those things that look exactly like that. So just keep an eye out for that sort of thing. You can just clone stamp right over those areas if you do have duplicates. Okay, here we go, and we're taking care of this scratch as well. Now, my next big tip when using the clone stamp tool, let's just zoom even more. This is going to help with the fine detail work. You can choose your sample point. So we're going to hold Alt or Option. Now, if I want to see a preview of what I'm actually going to do, we can go to Window and then down here to Clone Source. Okay, so this Clone Source dialog is really cool because we can actually turn this option on that says Show Overlay. So if I click Show Overlay on, what it's going to do now is it's going to actually show me what I'm going to be painting. So if I have to paint over this area where I've got this, I've got a continuation of a shadow line here, I can't be painting over here or over here because it won't look right. So what I'm going to do is sample here. I've got Show Overlay checked on, and now it gives me a really nice overlay of what it's actually going to look like. So when I click and start painting over it, there's no guesswork involved. I know exactly what I'm going to be putting down, and I can place things exactly where I need, and it's just going to make my job a lot faster when I'm working with the clone stamp tool because I know exactly what it's going to look like after I've already placed the tool. There's no guesswork involved after that. All right, so we're going to sample right there. We're going to paint this in, and there's a good example where that doesn't look natural, right? So let's sample down here, and we're going to just paint this in and fix that up really nicely. So this is basically the technique we're going to take with the majority of the photo. Basically taking all these little areas like this, that's a great example too. We're going to sample right here and see what it would look like as I paint over. And don't be afraid to sample a lot of times. What I'm doing here is sampling, over and over again, and I'm just painting in to replace those parts. Like here, I'm basically painting that line straight up there and using the Show Overlay to be able to see what I'm doing beforehand. All right, so let me just finish this up real quick, and then we're going to show you guys what the brush tool looks like. There we go, and we're going to go all the way to the edge of our subject here. You can make your brush large or small depending. If you're working on a small area, I would recommend using a small brush. It's going to help you stay more precise. Working on a large area, you're going to want to use a large brush because it's going to allow you to work a little bit faster. There we go. That's really nice. Okay, now we're going to show you the third technique, and this is using the brush tool. Now, the reason you would want to use the brush tool, this is going to be your last resort, is if you don't really have another option, if there's not really anything to sample from. So a spot healing brush is when you have a lot to sample from. Clone stamp is when you have a little bit less to sample from, and using the brush tool really means you don't have a lot to sample from at all. So we'll show you when you actually want to use that. For instance, let's create a new layer here, and we're going to hit B for the brush tool. Now, here's how you can use the brush tool. Basically what we're going to be doing here is I'm going to be sampling a color just by holding Alt or Option. That samples a color, and then I'm going to be painting with the brush tool. So this is basically when you don't have, this is a case where I need to define, zoom out a little bit there, I need to define basically where his chin is, right? But there's a giant tear there, and then this area, the color is all weird, and there's not a lot that I can work with here. So I need to paint it in by hand, and that's what we're doing with the brush tool. So what we're going to do is I'm going to sample these colors here that are actually, in what I would call the good color range, and I'm just basically have to paint in a new chin. So this is where you can get to be a little bit creative and see how your painting skills line up. All right, there we go. Now, I would definitely say that the brush tool is a last resort. You don't want to start using this tool unless you need to, because it's going to be the hardest of all. But sometimes you really just don't have an option. All right, there we go. So I'm painting in kind of like the base colors here, and then we're going to go back in just a second, and I'm going to add some more detail. All right, and if you do a good job of it, it should look like the original photo. All right, and in this case, we're pretty lucky because the original photo is relatively low resolution. I would not recommend grabbing a brush tool and painting someone's face on like a 20 megapixel image because you'll be able to tell. All right, so now I need to define the best, basically define the bottom of his chin or like a chin line. So what I'm going to choose is a dark color that's actually in my photo, and we're going to start painting this in as well. I am using a Wacom tablet here, which is a lot like using a paintbrush, which definitely makes things a lot easier. And if you're concerned with like how much you're actually going to be putting down as far as like how much ink is going to actually go onto your image, you can change your flow here. So using a lower flow will allow you to build your coloring up, which will allow you to create transitions that look a lot more natural. Now I'm doing this relatively quickly. If this were client work, I would be spending a bit more time on this. But for the tutorial, this is about what we're going to be doing with our brush tool. So if we zoom out there, I mean, I kind of had to reconstruct his face a little bit, but it's much better than our original. There we go. Let's get some more shading in here. We can even give him, there we go, a really high masculine cheekbones. Look at that. We're not going to play around with this too much, but really cool way where you can actually reconstruct. And then again, this is when you really don't have any other options. And if you did want to add some texture in over top of that, we're going to show you how to do that as well. Basically, all you would need to do is create something like a noise filter. So if I created a new layer, and let's make a selection right around this layer, I'm going to fill this, Shift Delete with 50% gray. We're going to go to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, okay? And basically what I'm just doing, let's just add a little bit less. There we go. We're going to change this layer from normal down to soft light. I'm just giving this a little bit of texture. It may be hard to see here on the video. Make sure your quality is set up to high. We're just adding a little bit of texture over top of there, and then I could just layer mask this in and put this basically right over top of wherever I paint. And it's going to give it a little bit of texture, which makes it look more like it was in a photo and less like I just painted it on with the brush tool. So that's just a little key if you are going to be using the brush tool to kind of get rid of everything, or to repair these areas of your photo. So these are the principles. We're going to be using the spot healing brush tool as well as the clone stamp tool and the brush tool to repair this image. So these are not really hard things to do, but they do take a while. So what I'm going to do now, we're going to speed the film up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and complete the rest of this image. You guys can watch me in a little bit more of a fast forward, and then we're going to come back afterwards and show you guys how to repair some of the colors in the image. All right, so here we are starting off with the clone stamp tool, and we're going to be working around the borders and edges, taking care of small blemishes and areas, things like that. I'm working on the non-technical parts first, the not difficult parts, so I can kind of get used to Photoshop, and that way by the time I get to the face, I'm a little bit more like tuned into what I'm actually doing. So we're just making selections and painting it in, and really just trying to do the most simple job I can when it comes to repairing this. So starting around the frame here, we're basically just clone stamping from one area over to another one. And this is really about as simple as it gets, is using one area to cover the other one with the image frame. All right, and here we can see switching back and forth to the spot healing brush as well. So going up to the clone stamp here, sampling from the right and painting left, right over there to cover that spot. And then for this part, I'm actually just grabbing the brush tool and sampling a color that works well and kind of blending that together because I didn't have a lot to actually sample. All right, going back to the clone stamp tool, this is an area, I'm just using every little bit of information I possibly can have. And, nothing's gonna blend in perfectly, but the image is going to look like an old photograph no matter what I do. So I'm gonna keep that a little bit in mind while I'm actually blending these things in. So we're gonna try to sample his hair and kind of paint that in a little bit, get rid of some of these more blemishes. But you can see for the most part, I'm staying away from his face or anything that's, relatively difficult to do. Around his neck area right now, I was painting with the brush tool just to make it a little easier. And this is all with the brush tool as well because I don't have really any areas to actually sample with. So the clone stamp tool is not really gonna work that well on his face. All right, there we go. And then zooming out, we're basically gonna take care of some excess machinery here and just kind of, getting these things kind of roughed in. And this is gonna take as long as little bit as you'd like. You can spend days and days on this, or you can try to get it done like I did in about 20 minutes. So kind of repairing everything. Now this is basically just using the brush tool here, sampling colors and painting in, because there was really no information to use with something like a clone stamp tool. It was so badly degraded that really the only option I had was a brush tool. So I'm lucky that object is not very complex. All right, and we're clone stamping, and then there on the bottom of the image, we're just gonna leave that kind of be to make it look like it's an old photo. No big deal, and there we go, done with the retouching. And that wraps up the retouching part of this image. It took about 20 minutes in real time, but it made a huge difference in the final image. Let's look at the before. This is without any retouching at all, and here's the after. You can see it made a huge difference. Left a little spot in the corner, but that gives it a little bit of authenticity in there. Now let's take a look at what we can do with actually changing the colors in this image to get rid of some of this color cast. You can see here on the top part of this image, we do have like a bit of a yellow color cast in our image. And that's gonna happen anytime you have like an old aged photo. They tend to just kind of like change colors and things like that. So what I'm gonna do, we're gonna grab an adjustment layer. We're gonna go all the way down here to the very bottom to where it says selective color. So I really like the selective color adjustment layer because we can choose the exact color we want and we can adjust it either more or less cyan, magenta, yellow, or black. So the first color I really want to choose is my yellows because we do have like this yellow color cast that's pretty much over the entire image, or at least the like top part of it. So what we're going to do, we're going to change this for the colors. We're going to go down to yellows, and then just to see what it's actually being affected, usually I'll take a couple of these sliders and just push them left and right to see how it actually affects my image. Let's just zoom in so we can see the yellows in effect there. All right, so we can take our yellows, and I'm just going to bring less yellow. So we could see if I were to bring more yellow, this is what we get. It's kind of making the problem a bit worse. And here bringing less yellow really does help that problem out. There we go. We can give it either more or less magenta. There we go. That looked pretty good right there at 0. And then we can give it a little bit of cyan or a little bit less. All right, let's push it a little bit. And cyan is a cool color, so it's going to make the image just a little bit cooler. All right, that's looking pretty good. Let's just turn this off and on so we can see the actual difference that makes with the color cast. It's really nice because it actually helps our subject's skin as well. All right, now if there are any other colors, let's go ahead and see what our reds look like, because we do have some reds in the subject's skin as well as what's going on here. If we bring in less cyan or more cyan, how does that look? Well, this doesn't really help our problem out, but adding some cyan actually does help out quite a bit. Let's look at our reds now as well. And we can see it really does a nice job removing a color cast there too. So we can see about pulling the yellows down, but in this case it adds a little bit too much purple into the image. Pulling these up just a little bit, I think works out pretty well. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We do have, let's see what we've got with our magentas down here as well. We can pull our cyans down and then push them back up, and we can see that this is the area that's kind of showing up magenta. We can see just by adjusting these sliders, basically looking at our image. There we go, and maybe we'll push a little bit more yellow into those magentas as well. So let's take a look right down here on this image, and we can see there's the before. It really does have that like really magenta kind of purple color cast there, and turning this back on, we can see it pretty much gets rid of that. Okay, now the last thing I want to do is change this from magenta to our whites, and what we want to do is we do have still a lot of yellow in the light colors. So you can see it around the border. So what we're going to do is in the whites, we're just going to take this yellow down, and that's going to really help to cool our image down. We don't want to go too far. It's going to kind of start to look blue, but bringing this down a little bit, you can see if we were to push it up, it would make the whites a lot more yellow. Down really helps out look a lot better. All right, and then let's play with our blacks just a little bit. We can make these a little bit darker if we want. It's going to add some contrast, or make them a little bit lighter. I think a little bit darker in this case actually works to our benefit. All right, let's go ahead and close that out, and we can see what this image looks like before and after the color correction. So here's before color correction. You can see it's just all over the place. And after the color correction, it really does look quite a bit better. Now, if you did want to add any more color to the image, let's say we've got a yellow shirt and we want to just make it a little bit more yellow, you can use either a hue saturation adjustment layer or curves. Let's try a hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to bring up my saturation just a little bit. There we go. That looks good on the shirt. It doesn't look good everywhere, so let's go ahead and close this down. I'm going to hit Command I on my layer mask, and now we can just paint this visible right where our shirt is. to bring some of that original color back to our shirt, because the image as a whole did have a bit of a color cast to it. There we go. And we didn't want it to be visible over the whole image, but in some areas we do want to bring a little bit more color just so we can actually add some life back to the photo and it doesn't look so monochromatic. All right, so let's go ahead and group those together. There we go. Here is our color, and that finishes up our image. Really, really cool. All right, so let's take a look at our original. This is our background. Here we go. We started out with basically just everything completely cut apart and needing a lot of retouching. Then we brought the images together, and you can see we brought them each on different layers. So we've got, let's just make that visible there. So we've got this layer here making up the left side, the right side, and then the bottom. And then retouching those layers takes away all of those blemishes. Really, really great. And then we're bringing back the color adjustments to make it look a lot more like it did probably about 20 or 30 years ago. Awesome, awesome image. That's the end of today's episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you got any images that are sitting around in an old photo album getting all dusty and torn up and turning yellow, scan them into your computer and use these techniques to bring them back to life. Remember how we showed you to actually cut out each of the individual pieces and then place them back together using clues from the original image as to where the individual pieces are going to go. Then we showed you guys how to use retouching tools such as the spot healing brush tool, the clone stamp tool, and the regular brush tool to get rid of all the blemishes and even fix tears. And then we showed you guys how to change the colors, getting rid of those color casts and bringing new life back to the photos. If you guys love Photoshop and photography just like I do, hit subscribe on your screen right now. We'll send you free Photoshop and photography episodes every single week. And if you have an idea for a new episode or a question about today's episode, leave it in a comment down below. We'll do our best to answer those questions. And as always, share Phlearn with your friends, because nothing is better than sharing. Thanks, guys. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone. Bum, 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 bum. Bum, bum, bum. Bum, bum, bum. All right, guys, and that's it for today's, episode. I really hope this, I hope it helps out. Cool. If you love Photoshop and photography, gotta stretch my mouth out. All right, guys, that's the end of today's,